Hey there! This video will be part 2 of a series of recreating Facebook and SvelteKit for the sake of learning. In this video, we're going to be finishing the login and logout process. We're also going to work on creating the profile page that will show the list of friends and posts. And then we're going to work on our search so that we can search for people and add them and also remove them. So the first thing we need to do is to get the login and logout working. So let's wrap the login form in a form tag and set the action to log in. Plus we need to fix the button to be a submit type. Then we make a plus page.server.ts file in the login folder. This is where the form submission will be sent. And in here we'll have an actions object that SvelteKit requires. And in that object, a function that matches our action, which is login. At the top, we get the data from the form, and each field like this. Then we make sure they're filled out, and if not, we'll return a fail response. Then we check if the email and password matches someone in the database, and if so, return an ID. This probably should just be a new function in our user module. That way all database functions are contained in there, but that's okay for now. Just keep that in mind. Then we get the returning user ID as well, as we need it next when we use our session module to insert a new session. All it needs is the ID. We need to check if that returns a validation error or not. And if it's okay, we can set the cookie, just like we did in the create script. So I'll just steal that one to save time. And of course at the end they get sent to the home page afterwards. Back on the form, we can import the form response on top with the props rune. And grab the same error message we used in the create account page and stick it above the header. And then test it out. Now onto the logout endpoint. We already made the folder, we just need to make a plus server.ts file in there. And in this file, make a basic get endpoint function. And this function will get the session GUI ID from the cookie. Update the database to mark it as expired. And then delete the cookie. We need to use the same settings when deleting the cookie or it can cause issues. So I just copy the create options. Then at the end, cause a redirect to the login page. Now something I forgot in the last video is we need to go into our login script and add a check if someone's trying to sign up with the same email. And if so, we'll return an error message. To do that, we'll use our user module and add a new function to find someone by email. This will just compare the lowercase emails to each other. And if we find one, we return an error message. And here is that working. Now let's work on our profile page for people. We'll make a profile route, a special slug folder in there, which will be the ID of the user we want to see. Now let's log in so we can get to a profile page as it's locked behind a login using our hooks file. But before we make the page, I want the profile to have the same header as the newsfeed page we're seeing now. and that header is only on the root page currently. So we're going to remove it from the home page and move it to our navbar component here we didn't end up using. We need to change this B logo image to also come from the root of the site with a slash in front, because it'll be in different folders now. Otherwise it'll throw an error like on the profile page. And while I'm thinking of that, we also need to do the same for the background image on the layout file. Back on the navbar component, let's move the newsfeed panel to the main page and fix the if block to only check for this. And now on the profile page, import it and add it to the HTML. We need to send data to it though, and that's what it uses to determine the profile picture menu. In order for the form and data props to work though, we can make them optional by setting a default value of null like this. But we still want to pass the data through. The data is what contains the info of our logged in user from the locals, and our nav component needs that to generate the avatar on top. That component can't read locals on its own, so we need to pass it from a page.svelte file by just including it like this and importing the props on top like this. And we don't have that available right now because the profile has no page surfer file, so let's make one of those. In there, let's call the SvelteKit load function. We will need the locals and the params. Then we get the user ID from the URL like this. Then get the user from the database using our get single function we made. And throw an error if not found. And at the end, return the profile and the user object the navbar needs from the locals. Now we work on the profile now that we have the user's info. I'm going to manually go into my profile, which is ID 17 in the database, and open it up in the browser. Let's add the round circle for the profile image. It'll be a little bit bigger this time. And we can insert it by calling our photos URL we previously made. Now next to that, using Flex, we can display the name, location, and occupation. I want some icons next to the location and occupation like Facebook does. So let's grab those. And then we'll style them a little bit to be a little bit more opaque. Then we can add some headers for our friends list and our future posts. To get our friends list, we need to send it in on our page load. So back in our server file, we create a new variable that would be the list of friends, and we call a new function in our user module, one we still need to create though, and send the user ID to it. In that user module, let's copy the getAll function, have it import a single ID, and change the SQL to find people and return them if they are in the friends table with the user as the user ID column. Now we will only get the users that this person added as a friend. We also need to get the friends where the other people added them, the friend added them. And in those cases, the user ID and friend ID would be swapped. So we'll do two queries. And at the end, those will just be combined into one list we return. Back in the page, we can loop through any friends we found now with an each block. In there, it'll be a link sending people to that person's profile. I want there to be 4 even spots for friends, so I'm setting the flex basis to be a calculation that is 100% of the width divided by 4 and minus the flex gap we add. Then in there, add a box that will show the profile picture in a square instead of a circle. So it'll be similar to the one we did above. We can even steal the background image code and change the variable. Below the image, the person's name. And there we go. Already, as you can see, I've added some more fake people before I started this video and set them to be my friend so we can have some examples. But we also need to display a message if there are no friends. So we can use an if block for that. And I'll put the message in a gray box with gray text, kind of like Facebook does. If I go into our database now and remove the friends I already added, we can start from scratch and see our message. Next after friends will be posts, but I want to come back to that later. But let's make a place in the scripts where it'll get sent back. It'll just be blank for now. And then in the page, do the same each loop for posts and put a note to ourselves for later. But we can do the same message for when there's no posts. So let's just take that above from the friends and change some things. Above everyone's posts on Facebook, there's a text box where you can start writing to their wall, even on your own wall. So let's start working on that though. Right below the heading, we'll add the logged in user's avatar inside a div. Let's do our avatar component for this. It just needs a user ID and an on-click event. And we'll make it link to our own profile for now. Then next to that, there's a text area for writing your message. And on Facebook, it appears to have no border and just have some placeholder text. So that's easy to do by default with our Tailwind. And below that, Facebook has two buttons, one for just submitting your message and another for adding images. So let's add those two divs side by side to do that. And also let's grab two icons that match those buttons. So we'll have a pen and a photo icon. And then to finish making them act like buttons, we'll add a hover style using Tailwind and the cursor pointer, because it doesn't have one by default. Let's check our other users' profiles manually by changing the URL for now. And you can see all the other people I've added previously. We should also change the wording of the text area placeholder if we happen to be on our own profile. So we can change this to a shorthand JavaScript if statement to switch the message if the user and profile IDs match or not. While we are here, let's also add a friend button, but we only want to do that if they aren't friends already, and if it's not yourself, of course. So we need a way to know the logged in person's friends on each page, their list of friends, which sounds like something we can use our locals for. Remember previously we set the locals in the hooks file, and right now it's storing the logged in user's profile in a user object. Let's go in the hooks file and add another object to locals, a friends list, but we don't want or need to store everything about the friend, the whole user object. Perhaps we just need the IDs. So to do that first, since we're using TypeScript, we need to go into the app.d.ts file and add another property to the locals here. It'll just be an array of numbers. Then back in the hooks, we need to get the list of friends from the function we made a bit ago. And use the map function in JavaScript to just grab the ID from those objects and store it in a friend's ID variable. And we end up with just a list of IDs from the list of objects that has everything. Now to use this on our pages, remember we have to get them from a page.server file and load function and send them into the pages through the data props. So in our profile server file, add friend IDs to the return and set it to locals.friendids. And in the profile page below their location, we can do an if statement that makes sure it's not you and that this person isn't your friend. And we do that by just checking the array of friends to see if it doesn't include this profile ID. Then in that we can show our button. Let's also add an icon in here. We set it up so that we can add children to this component, but we haven't used it yet, so we need to work on the styling a bit more to make it look good. If we drill into the component, we're positioning the icon absolutely because we took this from the input one, but we don't need to do that here. So let's just put any children before the text normally like this. Then in the style, make the button flex and centered so they will line up nice. And back on our page, our button will call a function called addFriend. And up top, let's create that function. It'll be asynchronous, and we're going to call and create our first API endpoint in our app. On top, let's show our loading animation when we start by importing our loader reactive variable that we created. Then to read an API endpoint, we call the fetch function and set the URL. And this path doesn't exist yet, but it will be in a little bit. This function will add a friend, so setting this method to post in the fetch function would be most appropriate. We also need to send the data we need in the body of the request, and we can send it just as a JSON string, and the data only needs to be the profile ID. We also need the logged in user's ID too, but we could just grab that from the session so it's a little more secure. Then we do some checks to make sure it returned successfully. If so, we'll force the data to reload by calling invalidateAll in SvelteKit and hiding our loader. And if it does fail, we'll show our toast component by just referring to our toast global reactive variable we made. Now to make the API endpoint, create an API folder in routes, then a friends folder in there, and a +server.ts file in that folder. This file will have a post function since we set the method to post, and we'll need to bring in the request and the locals. We then get the JSON data from the body like this. Then we'll use our friend module insert function we made in the beginning to add them. This wants a friend object as input. So to do that, let's make that first. In this object, the user ID will be who's logged in from the locals, and the friend ID was from the JSON body. Then we can just use our friend module and the insert function. And finally, we can just return success true. Back on the page, looks like we need to teach our button component to do an on-click. We see an error right now. So if we drill into the component, we need to just add it to the props with a default of null and include it in the element. Now let's try it out. If I click on the add friend while on Molly's profile, it should reload when done. And now we can see the friends list updated because of invalidateAll recalled, the load function in the server file, and also the button, of course, is gone. If we go to my profile, we can see it shows Molly as a friend. Now that we can add friends, let's make our search bar work so we can find people. Our search bar is in the nav component now, so let's go in there. First, we need to track what the input is in the box, so we're going to bind the value to a new state variable called search term. And then I want to use something called a debouncer to search an API when they type. The debouncer will just delay the API calls so that every keystroke doesn't make a request to the server. It'll wait a bit until they're done typing, which will save a lot on the server requests. So we'll do onInput equals a debounce function, and this function will call a findUsers function. And this error is just saying we also need to include the onInput in our component real quick. So on top, let's make the debounce function. It needs a callback as input. We'll set a timeout variable. And then it'll return a function that calls the callback after a short amount of time, like 300 milliseconds here. The args part just allows your callback to have arguments sent in if required, but ours doesn't. Now let's make our find users function. This will be another API fetch. It'll be a GET request though, with the search time added to the query string like this. We'll check the response, and if okay, we get the JSON result and set a new variable called search results to the user's property. We haven't made that side of it yet, just so you know, just assuming that's what we're going to call it. The new variable needs to be declared on top of the function though, and with a state rune, so it's reactive. If it fails, we'll show our error message. A few more things to add here. We need to clear the results on each search, so that can be blank if nothing was found. I want to have a reactive variable for tracking if a search is in progress, and this will help us later with the output. Now let's make the API page for this as well. So add a folder in the API route called user, and in there a file, and in that server file a get function. And this function will get the query string parameters like this. We can then have a placeholder for our list of users we are going to return. Then only do the search if the keywords is set and it's not blank. And the search will be our user module's get all function. And then at the end, it'll return users. We just need to go into our get all function though and allow it to accept a search term. So if we drill into that, we can add keywords here in the parameters. Then let's split the term by spaces so we can search each word. This variable will end up being our query parameters as well when we're done. And now we can make a variable that will produce our dynamic where statement. It'll just be a string. Next, loop through the words we found. And for each one, change the parameters to have the wildcards added to the front and back of it. And add to our where string the SQL that compares the name to it in lowercase. And we'll dynamically change the placeholder here for the SQL statement by referring to the I variable in our loop +1. So it ended up being $1, $2, etc. And then finally in the SQL, a where function with 1 = 1, and then inserting our where variable. We need the 1 = 1 so that if our where variable ends up being blank, the SQL won't fail and we won't get a fatal error. And then we set the parameters of the query also. Now to make sure we are getting results, I can add a console log back in the component. If we search for a few letters, we get 3 results. Now to display the result, we can do something similar to the slide out menu. If the search term is not blank, let's add the same div that we used for the menu. And if we try it out, we do have some issues with the overlap though. So let's set the Z index of the search to 20, and also while we're here, the Z index of the menu to 10, so that the search will always be on top if they happen to have the menu out too. Also, the pop-outs don't go all the way to the edge, so let's change the positioning to be to the edge and use padding to space it instead. And that's much better, I think. Now in our pop-out, let's loop through any results. Each output will be a link that goes to their profile. We'll make it a flex box because we'll have an avatar and the name next to it. Then in the link, add the avatar and send the person's ID. And the function for now can be nothing, as the link will handle it. And below that, a div that will show the name and location on top of each other. Now if we search, we do see some results, but let's get rid of that blue color, and that's coming from our links CSS. We can add a class called noColor and go back in our main CSS file and only apply the blue if the A tag does not contain the noColor class. There we go. So let's click on one, and it looks like it might have changed, but as you can see, the search results stayed there over the page, so we need to fix that. I'm going to add an onClick to the link that calls a clear search function, and this function will remove the search text, the results, the loader, and any pop-outs the user had out, like the menu. And now if we try it, it works as expected. Let's work on showing no results if none was found. We just add an if block and show our same gray box as the no friends one. But for the if statement, we use that search loading function. This will stop the no results from showing while the results are still loading. So also let's make our logos links get back to the news feed, since we currently don't have a way to do that right now. And there we go. So far it's working pretty good. Back in our profile, if someone is friends, let's have a way to remove the friend. So let's copy our add friend button here and change the if block to show if they are friends, the opposite. And if that's true, the button will say friends with a different icon that we can grab from Tabler. And let's also make it gray like Facebook does. To make it gray, we have to allow our button to take in additional classes to override the ones that are there, but we can't use the class reserved word, so we'll just call it class names instead. And then we just set that to be the button's class, like this. And back on the page, we can now add classes to force it to be gray with black text. And we need to override those by putting an exclamation point in front of the class, and that's how you do the CSS important shortcut in Tailwind. Then also on Facebook, when you click on the friend button, if you're on a phone, you have a slide up options panel, and that allows you to unfriend, unfollow, and do other things. We'll make something similar, but just have an unfriend and a cancel button. To do that, we'll need to set the on click for the button to change a show model variable to true. And then up on top, make that variable. Then at the top as well, the page will do an if block, and in there create a div that will throw a dark overlay over the page. And on top of the overlay, using z-index, a white box that will slide up from the bottom using our svelte transitions. In the panel, we can use the same style button links we used on our menu for the logout. So let's go to that file and copy and paste those, which is a nav component. But we'll make these buttons instead, as they aren't navigating anywhere. They're going to do on-click functions. And instead of change password, we'll change the wording to be unfriend, and we'll grab an icon from Tablar for that. Will be cancel instead of this. And let's move the on-click function from the icon to the button, and it'll be a new function called remove friend. And then the bottom link, that'll just set the show model to false to hide the panel. Up on top, let's create that remove friend function. It'll be similar to add friend above it, so let's copy the whole thing and paste it. But instead of a post, it'll be a delete method. And on success, we'll hide the module by setting this boolean. And we'll change the error message too, of course. Now let's go into our friend API endpoint file, and below our existing post function, add a delete function. This will get the JSON body and just run our friend module's delete function that we created. And all that wants is a user and a friend. And the double question mark here is the default if that happens to not exist, so it doesn't throw a fatal error. Then at the end, it'll also just return success true. This reminded me though, we also need to go into our delete function and also delete the opposite. So in here, we'll do another query that just swaps friend and user ID. I'm sure there's a better way to handle adding and removing friends from both directions, but this will do for now. And in this part, we got an error that a button cannot be in a button. So let's go into our icon component and then change it to be a div and maybe not have it clickable. And then let's just find all the places in our code where we used it and fix it to not be clickable. And as you can see, we didn't even use the on click for any of them yet. So that works just fine. And there we go. Now we can remove friends as well. And that's going to be about it for this one. Next video, we'll probably work on the posts. I know I said this video, but I had to work on this first. If you guys have any questions, just let me know, and thanks for watching.